Imagine waking up one morning to discover that your country has been split in half. Your neighbors, who speak the same language and share the same history, now live in a different nation. This isn't science fiction. This is exactly what happened to Ireland in 1921, when a single island became two separate countries. But why? The answer lies in a story of conquest, resistance, religion, and politics that spans over 800 years. A story that begins not with politicians in suits, but with Norman knights in chainmail. To understand why Ireland is divided today, we need to travel back to the year 1169, when everything changed forever. Picture Ireland as a patchwork of Gaelic kingdoms, dozens of petty kings ruling over clans that had lived on this emerald island for over 1,000 years. They spoke Irish, practiced ancient Celtic customs, and were fiercely independent. But across the Irish Sea, the Norman English were hungry for new lands to conquer. The invasion began almost by accident. Dermot MacMurrough, the King of Leinster, had been kicked out of his own kingdom after kidnapping another king's wife. Desperate to reclaim his throne, he sailed to Wales and made a deal with the devil, or at least with a Norman knight named Richard de Clare, known as Strongbow. "Help me take back my kingdom," MacMurrough promised, "and I'll give you my daughter's hand in marriage and make you heir to all my lands." Strongbow agreed, and what followed was a conquest that would echo through centuries. The Normans didn't just win battles, they transformed Ireland. They built massive stone castles where once stood wooden ring forts. They introduced feudalism, replacing the ancient Gaelic clan system with Norman lords and English law. Within a century, 3/4 of Ireland was under Norman control. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Something remarkable happened to these Norman conquerors. They became more Irish than the Irish themselves. They married into Gaelic families, adopted Irish customs, and even started speaking Irish. The English crown watched in horror as their Norman colonists went native. In response, they passed the Statutes of Kilkenny in 1366, which banned English settlers from speaking Irish, wearing Irish clothes, or marrying Irish people. The penalty? Death. These laws failed spectacularly. By the 1400s, English control had shrunk to a tiny area around Dublin called the Pale, literally a fence of wooden stakes protecting the last bastion of English rule. Everything beyond the Pale was Irish territory, and that's where we get the expression beyond the Pale, meaning wild, uncivilized, or unacceptable. Fast forward to the 1500s and enter one of history's most consequential figures, Henry VIII. When Henry broke with Rome and established the Church of England, he didn't just change religion, he weaponized it. Ireland remained stubbornly Catholic, and to Henry, this made every Irish person a potential traitor. His solution was as brutal as it was simple: crush Irish resistance through plantation, the systematic colonization of Irish lands with Protestant settlers. But it was Henry's daughter Elizabeth I who turned plantation into an art of war. After crushing a massive Irish rebellion led by Hugh O'Neill, the Earl of Tyrone, Elizabeth seized 6 entire counties in Ulster, the northernmost province of Ireland. These weren't just military conquests, they were demographic revolutions. Entire Irish communities were expelled, and in their place came tens of thousands of Protestant settlers from Scotland and England. The Plantation of Ulster was different from previous conquests. This wasn't about a few Norman knights taking over. This was about replacing the entire population. By 1700, Ulster had become a Protestant stronghold in a Catholic island. The settlers brought their Presbyterian faith, their work ethic, and their absolute loyalty to the English crown. They also brought something else, a deep, abiding fear of the Catholic majority that surrounded them. This fear would prove prophetic. In 1641, the displaced Irish Catholics launched a massive rebellion, massacring thousands of Protestant settlers. The rebellion was eventually crushed by Oliver Cromwell in a campaign so brutal that his name became a curse word in Ireland. Cromwell's soldiers showed no mercy. They slaughtered entire garrisons, sold Irish people into slavery in the Caribbean, and seized millions of acres of the best farmland for Protestant settlers. The message was clear. In Ireland, your religion determined your fate. Catholics were barred from owning land, holding office, or practicing law. They couldn't even own a horse worth more than £5. Meanwhile, Protestant settlers prospered under a system designed to keep them on top and Catholics on the bottom. This religious divide hardened over the next 2 centuries. In Ulster, Protestant settlers developed a distinct identity. They were neither English nor Irish, but something new. Ulster Protestants, who saw themselves as the rightful guardians of British civilization on a hostile island. They built their own churches, their own schools, and their own political networks. Most importantly, they built their own version of history, one where they were not colonizers but pioneers, bringing civilization to a backward land. Meanwhile, the Catholic majority nursed their grievances through centuries of oppression. They remembered when their ancestors owned the land, when Irish was the language of kings, when Catholic priests said Mass in hidden forest clearings because their religion was banned. They told stories of heroes like Patrick Sarsfield and Wolfe Tone, who fought against British rule. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were fuel for a fire that would burn for centuries. The 19th century brought new hope and new conflicts. Daniel O'Connell, the liberator, won Catholic emancipation through peaceful political pressure, proving that the British government could be forced to make concessions. But his success terrified Ulster Protestants, who saw every Catholic gain as a Protestant loss. When O'Connell's followers began demanding home rule, limited self-government for Ireland, Protestant fears reached fever pitch. The Home Rule crisis came to a head in 1912, when the British Parliament finally passed a bill granting Ireland its own parliament. Ulster Protestants were horrified. They had spent centuries building their dominance, and now they faced the prospect of being ruled by a Catholic majority that outnumbered them 3-1. Their response was to sign the Ulster Covenant, a document pledging to resist home rule by all means which may be found necessary. These weren't empty threats. Ulster Protestants formed the Ulster Volunteer Force, a 100,000-strong militia armed with rifles smuggled from Germany. In 1914, they were preparing for civil war when World War I intervened. Home rule was suspended for the duration of the war, but the fundamental question remained. What happens when a majority wants independence, but the minority will fight to prevent it? The answer came in 1916, when a small group of Irish Republicans launched the Easter Rising in Dublin. The rebellion was crushed within a week, but the British response, executing 16 rebel leaders one by one over 10 days, transformed a failed coup into a national martyrdom. Suddenly, the moderate Home Rule movement was swept aside by a radical independence movement led by Sinn Féin and the Irish Republican Army. In the 1918 election, Sinn Féin won 73 of Ireland's 105 seats on a platform of complete independence. They declared an Irish Republic and launched a guerrilla war against British forces. But here's the crucial point. Sinn Féin won almost nothing in Ulster, where Unionists still held most seats. Ireland wasn't just divided politically, it was divided geographically, with 2 incompatible visions of the future occupying the same island. The British government faced an impossible choice. They couldn't crush the independence movement without a massive military commitment, but they couldn't abandon Ulster Protestants, who had fought for Britain in World War I and were threatening their own rebellion. The solution was partition, splitting Ireland into 2 separate territories, each with its own parliament. The Government of Ireland Act of 1920 created Northern Ireland from 6 of Ulster's 9 counties, chosen specifically to ensure a Protestant majority. The remaining 26 counties became Southern Ireland, but Southern Ireland never functioned. The Irish Republican Army continued its war, and in 1922, after a brutal 2-year conflict, the British government signed the Anglo-Irish Treaty, creating the Irish Free State. But the treaty came with a terrible price. The Irish Free State had to accept partition, give up its claim to the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, and remain within the British Commonwealth. For many Republicans, this was betrayal. The result was a vicious civil war that tore Ireland apart. Brother fought brother, former comrades became enemies, and the country that had finally won its independence nearly destroyed itself in the process. Meanwhile, Northern Ireland got exactly what its Protestant majority wanted: their own state within the United Kingdom, with their own parliament at Stormont. But this wasn't a normal democracy. It was designed to ensure permanent Protestant rule. Catholics faced systematic discrimination in jobs, housing, and voting rights. The state's motto might as well have been a Protestant parliament for a Protestant people, as Northern Ireland's first Prime Minister James Craig declared. For 50 years, this system held. Northern Ireland remained peaceful on the surface, but underneath, resentment festered. Catholics were treated as second-class citizens in their own land, while Protestants lived in constant fear that their privileged position would be taken away. It was a cold peace maintained by the Royal Ulster Constabulary and the B Specials, an armed Protestant militia. The explosion came in the 1960s when a Catholic civil rights movement began demanding equal treatment. Their protests were met with brutal police violence, and the images of peaceful demonstrators being beaten by police batons shocked the world. The situation spiraled out of control when British troops were deployed to keep the peace in 1969. What was supposed to be a temporary intervention lasted 38 years. The period from 1969 to 1998 became known as the Troubles, a euphemism that hardly captures the horror of what followed. Over 3,500 people died in a conflict that saw the Irish Republican Army wage guerrilla war against British forces, while Protestant paramilitaries fought to maintain the union with Britain. Belfast became a city of walls, where peace lines separated Catholic and Protestant neighborhoods like the Berlin Wall divided East and West Germany. The Troubles finally ended with the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, a complex deal that satisfied no one completely, but offered everyone something they could live with. Northern Ireland would remain part of the United Kingdom, but only for as long as a majority of its people wanted it to. The Irish Republic gave up its constitutional claim to the north, while Britain accepted that Irish unity was a legitimate aspiration that could be achieved through democratic means. Today, the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland is barely visible. No checkpoints, no customs posts, just a line on the map. Both parts of Ireland are prosperous, democratic societies that have moved far beyond the sectarian hatreds of the past. Yet the division remains, a reminder of how history's wounds can take centuries to heal. The story of Ireland's partition teaches us that borders are more than lines on maps. They're the products of centuries of conflict, compromise, and competing dreams. The island that once seemed destined to tear itself apart has found a way to live with division while hoping for unity. Whether that unity will ever come is a question only future generations can answer. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Ireland today is not that it's divided, but that after 800 years of conquest, rebellion, and conflict, both parts of the island have finally found peace. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning everything you want. It's learning to live with what you have while keeping hope alive for what might be possible tomorrow. The division of Ireland reminds us that history is never just about the past. It lives on in every border, every flag, and every story we tell about who we are and where we belong. And sometimes, understanding that history is the first step toward healing its wounds.